Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi Achint. As you can see, I have with me Mr. Kanwal Sibal. Sirji, first, thank you so much. Namaskar, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, always.
We are meeting in a time where, historical precedences and geopolitical realities have completely changed. So, as I was asking you offline, is there something called a world order left, or we are just, come what may sort of a situation?
Well, the world order is there. It is enshrined in the UN Charter. Frankly speaking, that is a blueprint for a world order after 1945 and the horrors of the Second World War.
So,
And the guys who did it are the ones who are now totally rejecting it, repudiating it, because it's the United States that led the entire exercise. Of course, in collaboration even with the Russians and what have you. Uh, but if they do not at all give any importance to, forget the UN Charter, but even multilateralism. But you can have multilateralism outside the UN Charter, in
mhm.
the sense that if you believe that the world has to be managed cooperatively, and the war has to be avoided, conflict has to be avoided, that dialogue and diplomacy should be the option whenever there are differences and disputes, and you rely on consensus building by engaging everybody. Then yes, you need not necessarily follow the UN Charter, but the spirit of the UN Charter would be there in any multilateralism. Uh, but United States has been rejecting multilateralism to the point that I forget the exact date. 3 4 years ago, the UN had a full UNGA on reforming multilateralism. Multilateralism is in a crisis, and with what Trump is now doing, is going to the extreme in terms of rejecting any form of multilateralism. I mean, he's walked out of all multilateral organizations, even very important ones, like the Climate Change Agreement or the WHO or UNESCO or the UN Human Rights Commission. I'm not a fan of the UN Human Rights Commission, but nevertheless, it is a multilateral
Yeah.
organization which was set up by these guys in order to maintain pressure on the so-called global South. He walked out of that also, and he wrecked the WTO, which was the only multilateral economic organization which governed the World Trade Order, and in which genuinely all countries were equal, in the
Mhm.
sense that you could actually litigate against the United States and win that battle. But the whole thing was to move the United States out of its previous, uh, you know, uh, using previous use of Section 301 and this and that to take unilateral measures on the trade front. But WTO put a restraint on that. So they have wrecked the WTO by all this tariffs business, which are totally contrary to the WTO.
Mhm.
Uh, and and then can you imagine that he has revived the Monroe Doctrine? Now, he's gone back to the 19th century, where the whole continent is supposed to be the preserve of United States. On what basis? Aren't there sovereign countries in Latin America, and they're big ones, like Brazil?
Mhm.
Uh, they're sovereign countries. They take sovereign decisions. They have sovereign interests. They have developmental interests. They trade with the rest of the world. They need to do that. Uh, so why should they be subject to overlordship by the United States of America? But
True.
this is the spirit of the Monroe Doctrine and the Trump corollary, on which Venezuela was attacked in total violation of the UN Charter and international law. Its president was abducted, which was a violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, because a head of state of a sovereign country has sovereign immunity. And now he is talking about acquiring uh, other countries, and he says it very facetiously, Canada would be better to be a 51st state of the United States. And he now made claims on Greenland. On what basis? The national security. Um, he's put Europe in serious jeopardy. Then his repudiation of multilateralism goes in very interesting ways because all said and done, NATO is a multilateral organization, defense oriented, but multilateral organization. So he's been attacking NATO. EU is why they call themselves a union, but it is a multilateral arrangement within within Europe. And he's been openly saying that you know European Union is a threat, and he has no qualms about opposing the European Union and welcome Britain walking out of the European Union. And if you look at the logic of what he says and what Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, says, um, that international law doesn't matter. These are all niceties. The real thing is power, whether you can assert power. And Trump, remarkably, in his interview with New York Times, is totally unabashed. They asked him about international law. He says, "I don't believe in international law." They asked him, "What is it that can put restraints on your actions?" He says, "My own morality, my own mind, uh, what I think I should do." Now, a man who seems to be incapable of taking any serious interest or has insufficient understanding of geopolitics, for him to say that my international action would be governed by my morality, I don't know what that morality is, and my mind, and his mind is unstable. So you have a problem, don't you?
So when you look at the situation in the world, sir, there are three powers that he's going after dead on. One is actually four. Let me just uh, put that. But the three mains, one is Europe, second is Russia, China, and India. So when you see he's got, instead of dealing with them kind of as a block or anything like that, he's breaking them down and dealing with them. He doesn't deal with ASEAN, he deals with Indonesia. He doesn't deal with Europe as a block. He deals with France, he deals with Italy, he deals with Hungary separately. He's kind of breaking that entire structure apart. With, of course, Russia, China, and India, that's a different story altogether. But how do you see his breaking down, as you very clearly said, of the multilateral organizations that exist uh, to get what he wants to, as far as his unilateral goals are there? How do you see that change of behavior? And at the end of it, we are also seeing there's a certain resistance which is coming across. For example, Canada made a very, I'd say, a stupid move by sitting with China, but fair enough. That could have been hedging, but he went a little step ahead. Europe is hedging with us. So there's a lot which is happening as far as that is also concerned. So how do you see this balance and his efforts versus the others?
Well, a couple of things. Empirically speaking, if you are dealing with an organization, with a regional organization, then the capacity to browbeat a regional organization is less.
Yeah.
If you pick out individual countries and key countries within this kind of a regional organization and bring to bear your power, uh, then you can browbeat them and get what you want. So that is one. He would prefer to deal with countries individually so that he can browbeat them. Though, mind you, when comes to Europe, he summoned all these guys to Washington and made them sit around the Oval Table and patronized them. And these leaders, can you imagine some of them being world powers for such a long time? And
They
you
call him
base and then NATO Secretary General calls him daddy. So they accepted that humiliation. There, he felt that being the protector of these countries in terms of security through NATO, he could browbeat them, especially when they were in serious trouble uh, in the east because of the conflict with in Ukraine and with Russia. So he had uh, if you like, the levers to browbeat Europe. Um, Now, from his point of view, you take this business of the WTO. Now, he can't deal with the WTO as WTO. So he picks out, he takes these blanket tariff measures against everybody, then negotiates with them
Mhm.
separately, Japan, with South Korea, with the European Union, and within the NAFTA thing with Canada and Mexico. And that's how he's able to get what he wants. Um, so there it is. I think he's not a great fan of these APEC summits and ASEAN summits and stuff like that. He avoids them. Even the G7 summit, when it was held in Canada, he left a day before. So he sort of goes there and does his spiel, and then comes away. He's not either a consensus man or a multilateralist by any stretch of the imagination. And having him in a multilateral setting, and I have in mind also the Quad,
Mhm.
uh, can be a disaster, because the manner in which he approaches these things, he can say anything, he can do anything, he can off the cuff create a lot of turmoil of all kinds. Uh, so there it is. What you said is right. He prefers to deal with individual countries and browbeat them. Interesting thing is also this, that in Europe also there are some countries who feel that they can somehow uh, ingratiate themselves, not as a member of the European Union, but as individual countries.
Mhm.
Maloney has, and people say, oh, Maloney has good relationship with Trump. Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, in particular, he sort of carved out a role for himself as an interlocutor of Trump, where Trump likes him and sort of gives him access and stuff like that. Whereas Macron and Merz and others, uh, they have difficulty in dealing with Trump because they're not willing to kowtow and ingratiate themselves as in the way one or two other leaders do. Uh, so there it is. Countries also realize that if they make a gesture personally towards Trump, so they can somehow extract more from him or avoid his irrational actions against them and protect themselves better if they approach him and flatter him and that's what he likes. His entire cabinet are vying with each other to flatter him all the time, and he expects the same kind of thing from world leaders. And Machado, of course, has made an utter fool of herself, complete fool of herself, in the manner in which she has humiliated herself. And in fact, Trump has also been humiliated in a way because accepting second-hand goods, he's quite happy with that. Just to be on the light side, in Paris there are a lot of these boutiques where very rich people who have very expensive bags and clothes from designer houses, which are very expensive if you want to buy them, but they get tired of them, so they send them to these shops which sell them at a discount. Now, somebody who doesn't want to buy a Hermes bag for 5,000 euros or 10,000 euros can maybe buy it for 2,000 euros. And they're very happy about it. They can go around flashing it. It's the same thing he has done with his
Nobel
with
Peace
the
Prize.
Nobel Peace Prize. So he got it second hand and he's very happy about it.
It's going to be an insult to anybody who gets it the next time. It's going to be, I don't want this. No. Because so
No,
when you
and decency demands, I mean, any decent person would not, even if the woman wants to be the next president and wants to kowtow to him and lick his feet, any decent person would not accept to take away a Nobel Peace Prize medal given to him or her by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, but he's taken it. And in fact, he said when he was asked a few days ago, and I heard that she wants to meet you and she wants to hand you over the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you feel about it? He said, "I'll be honored."
I mean, the world is it's becoming, actually, honestly telling you, it's the law of the jungle. So it's much easier to understand than what it was before, sir. That's just my opinion, because previously there was a set way everything would go off, and when they didn't, people would just be a little off. Why is this happening? But today we know by innate self that there's nothing on pattern.
But Adi, there's a nuance here.
Okay.
Because, of course, America is the most powerful country in the world. So whatever action it takes, others have to lump it. Because others could have means to resist, but they don't want to enter into a conflict with the United States because it can then end into something very, very dramatic.
Mm.
Uh, they also don't want to come to the rescue of countries that the United States is targeting, because that can then make them a party to the conflict and then lead to more confrontation and escalation and stuff like that.
Mm.
I
Mm.
have in mind, for example, Russia and China coming to the rescue of Iran, which is, at least for Russia, which is next door. But that would mean taking on the United States upfront, which they would not want to do because they want to control the ladder of escalation. The
Mm.
point I'm making here is that if you look at the rest of the world, leave United States out. Who which are the countries who believe that might is right? I mean, we can talk a lot about China and its activities in the South China Sea, its threats to Taiwan, its territorial claims, and everything else. But nevertheless, uh, at least for the time being, it is staying in hand. It is not acting in the same way as the United States is, and still claims that they believe in a different form of governance. They believe in the strong UN Charter, non-interference in the internal affairs of countries. That China doesn't interfere in other countries, and they believe in equality. Whatever the rhetoric, at least the rhetoric is there. Similarly, Russia, of course, is Putin is very sober on that account, constantly talking about the importance of the UN and the UN Charter and adherence to the UN Charter. That security, there should be equal security for all, etc., etc. Principles that, on the face of it, are totally acceptable and respectable. Uh, Europe, uh, barring this Ukraine thing where I think they've gone off the handle, still talks about values and international order and rules order and stuff like that. Global South definitely does that because they are the victims of all this lawlessness.
Mm.
So actually, the country that fits the description that you have of today's world, uh, the country that is responsible for the description you've given of today's world is the United States of America. They- in many ways, they have gone berserk.
KY. Mm. When we look at, let's come to Russia, China, and India, sir. When you look at the dealings between Russia and US, one notices there is a certain sense of realism which is kind of coming across. They are talking about a solution, and they are talking about the Russian interest within the thing. So there is that sense of realism which comes across. But that realism is not being translated into the dealings between India or India and USA, or USA and China. As a matter of fact, India, fair enough. I mean, it's regional issues. China is being blocked, as a matter of, if you look at it with regards to its supply chains. So that kind of respect is not being given to these both countries. How do you analyze this, and why is that, sir?
Well, insofar as Russia is concerned, there's a little bit of history. Um, he's been blowing hot and cold on Russia, as you know, during his first term. He's the one who imposed uh, massive
Sanctions.
tariff
Yeah. And he
sanctions,
harmed Ukraine.
and he expelled a lot of Russian diplomats and this and that, and boasted about it.
Yeah.
But during his campaign for the second term, he talked about Biden having mishandled the whole thing, and that if he had been in power, Russia would not have dared
Mm.
to attack Ukraine. There is that side to it also.
Mm.
It's not simply that uh, he is interested in engaging Russia. His argument also is that Russia would not have dared to do that. And he said that, when I come back to power within a week, I can solve it and stuff like that. So the MAGA base, as you well know, one doesn't have to go over that ground again, didn't want the United States to be involved in forever wars, concentrate on the United States itself, rebuild its economy, especially the manufacturing sector and jobs and employment and inflation and stuff like that. Uh, so he was interested in uh, finding some solution to the conflict in Ukraine. And I think part of the argument or the approach has been uh, that Europe uh, has been through NATO dragging United States into this conflict, which he did not want. He didn't want to have a direct confrontation with Russia or keep spending money. He wanted to Europe to bear more of the burden of security. What is the security fears in Europe? They are Russia. So when
Mm.
he was telling them that you raise your percentage of defense spending to 5% of GDP, again, the objective was that you bear the burden.
Mm.
That Russia has to be countered, but don't rely on me alone. You spend the money too on confronting Russia. Then he wants to have, being a businessman, he wants to have access to Russia's resources and raw materials, which is why, astonishingly, he has a businessman who's dealing with such a serious, long-standing geopolitical issue of relations between Russia and the West.
Yeah.
It is not a matter where a businessman can deal with this. It needs a it needs a much more structured and well thought out, process based decision making on how to deal with Russia. There are so many dimensions to it. But he's
Yeah.
got a businessman there, and on top of that, he has his son-in-law involved, who has clear business interests and real estate interests.
Yeah.
So that is one aspect of his approach to Russia. It's he even now there is a belief, it may be right, it may be wrong. I have no means to establish the truth, that this so-called attack on the presidential palace
Well,
in,
there.
uh, in Russia by Ukraine, that it was not possible unless there was an American hand.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
because
New
if
York Times says that it gives the president plausible deniability.
Yeah, so that's one. Now, when it comes to uh, China, uh, yes, you're right that they are now very concerned about China having taken an edge in some areas of technology and controlling critical raw materials and technologies. And but the fact remains that their biggest economic partner is China.
Yeah.
So you can't wish that away. Uh, that's one. Which means that they have to engage China. Even when they confront China, they have to engage China because they can't get out of the economic trap that those countries have, have built for themselves over the years. That's one part of it. The other is that China's military strength has grown enormously, and the parade that they had and which exhibited their weaponry and everything else was pretty impressive. And the fact is, and I have had the occasion to speak to some SINCPAC chiefs a couple of times who were here uh, the for dialogues. and they admitted um, that China has not developed capacities to hit them.
Hmm.
And they can suffer severe losses, although they'll be able to, in the process, also destroy Chinese capabilities, but at great losses for themselves too, which the American public would not be willing to accept or bear. Um, and and some of these things have been stated publicly by
Yep.
think pack chiefs saying by 2027 China will be so strong that they can do what they want, and that in any of the war games that they have held, they found that they're not able to handle China. I mean, they've been saying this publicly, so it's not as if it's a secret that way. So this is why they want very much. They've been insisting on having a military dialogue with China because they want to make sure that even as they compete with China, confront China, put sanctions on China, shouldn't go out of hand. There should be some guardrails so that their whole theory, their approach, three-pronged approach, com- cooperate where we should, compete where we need to, where we compete something, and confront where we must.
Hmm.
So what their strategy towards China is within these three concepts. They will cooperate, they will compete without conflict, but if there's confrontation, then they're ready for a confrontation. So it's a little more nuanced. With India, we are not their biggest economic partner. We don't have control over critical raw materials and technologies. We are a very open society. Our democracy and our openness gives them a lot of leverage within our country, directly and through NGOs. Uh, Now, for example, look at sometimes I feel a little diminished when I see this, and I say this objectively that Sergio Gore, the U.S. ambassador, comes to India, and it is flashed on the front page of our papers.
Hmm.
A lot of coverage is given, huh? As if a sort of a viceroy has come to India. Has any other ambassador of any other country given any notice of this kind? And all the papers and
Our media,
write-ups.
our media is absolutely ridiculous, sir. And I see you
No,
arguing with some of them once in a while on Twitter, and
no,
that
but
just it.
it is not only the media. Behind that is is our personality and our thinking and the way we see ourselves. Uh, I mean, it's. I mean, behave. If you behave like this, then
Mm.
why would the United States uh, treat you at the same level as they do Russia or China? And then uh, they're, they have big inroads into our NGOs. Uh, so these NGOs get a lot of direction, encouragement, and that from lobbies that are interested in keeping India a bit on the defensive, etc., etc. So India, unfortunately, once you become their biggest trade partner, and you become a very significant defense partner, etc., etc., then in a stable, forward-looking, genuinely strategic relationship, this can be helpful. But given our past experience of United States dealing with us and the conduct of United States with other countries, what really has happened is that we have given more leverage to the United States to deal with us, and that's where our problem is. Uh, but there it is. This is the reality.
But that's the challenge of a democracy, right? So you have that, the rest who aren't as open as us. So there is that flip side of the game. Here's a when we look at the dealing between India and USA, there are certain things which are coming across. is that the hedging that we are doing with the Europeans, and of course the defense deals and stuff, I don't think it's gone down pretty well because there were immediate reactions within America for that. How do you see India's hedging strategy? Because there are two, three things which I see India doing, and please comment on that. One is a de-Americanization in terms of the economy, reducing that dependence, reducing that, you know, or if I may say, sanction proofing ourselves slow and steady, as the Russians had done starting 2016, when pretty much the conversations broke down after the Minsk Accords and stuff, where the Russians probably realized this is not going to work. They still were talking, but at the back end, what they were doing was exactly what we are doing right now. So how do you see that aspect with this open engagement? Yeah, yeah, fantastic. We'll talk. It's great. They didn't include us into that Pax Silica or whatever it was, and
Mm.
then suddenly, no, 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 you need to be there, and so that whole thing. And we are not saying anything. Yeah, oh, wherever we are included, fine. Where we're not included, that's also fine. So how do you see that Indian policy, where how we as the government is approaching? How is it in the long term? What are we trying to do here, sir?
Well, the Russia case is different from ours. Russia didn't have much of a trade with
America.
America or financial dealings,
Yeah.
where the United States is our biggest trade partner. Our services sector, the IT sector, is heavily dependent on the US market. So there are these linkages which remain very important and beneficial. And we'll find it very difficult to disentangle ourselves because we have no choice uh, as an alternate as alternative partners. Uh, China is not there, Russia is not there, and Europe also is not. Individually, some European countries can be partners, but not on the same scale as our partnership with the United States. So there are certain uh, limitations. Secondly, making ourselves sanction proof is again a very difficult task.
It is.
Because, uh, sanctions proof meaning that you de-dollarize or you extract yourself from the US financial system. In
Mm.
fact, Rubio, it's quite interesting. I saw one of his clip a few days ago in which he said that the countries are moving out of the dollar system, and in 5 years, our sanctions will no longer be effective. Now, how do we move out of the dollar system or the uh, US controlled financial system of the world? Um, we are beginning to trade in national currency and encourage that. Up to a point, this is helpful. But if you look at the percentage of how much we do in terms of national currencies, and if you sort of if you look ahead and see in 5 years what could be the picture, I don't think it is. It gives you a sense of comfort that we have really, in some way, shielded ourselves from the power of the US dollar and the US control of the global financial system. Uh, that is uh, that is a challenge.
Mm.
If uh, when it comes to you know supply chains, reliable supply chains, and this and that, again we have a problem. We can't rely on China. So what do we do? So we can develop reliable supply chains to the extent that it is possible with Europe and with the United States. Uh, but again, the options are relatively limited so far as we are concerned. Look, if we are signing all these FTAs, in which direction are they going? These FTAs are going in the direction of getting yourself more and more uh,
That
within
was.
within the Western trading and financial system.
Mm.
Basically, if you sign with the UK, we sign with the EU, and you're looking for some trade deal with the United States, you sign with Canada. Australia is also a part of that system. UAE
Yeah.
definitely is. So basically, you are getting into a system where you will have partners who will not share. your thinking and approach of walking out of the uh, dollar system or the US controlled financial system. So uh, there is the problem. There is that definitely that problem. So uh, even when it comes to Japan, supposing you sort of increase as much as possible your relationship with Japan, you're not getting out of the US dominated system. So that's the reality. But to the extent that we can hedge against pressures from the United States, we should do so. But look now on Chabahar, I'm
Mm.
not too sure. I'm very concerned if really speaking what the reports are saying is true, that we have given that 180 million or 20 million, whatever it is, to Iran and say, okay, here it is, you deal with Java, we are walking out. Look at look at the look at the constraints we have, even on a project like this, uh, which simply gives us access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Uh, we are so vulnerable
Yeah.
to US sanctions on Russian oil. Reliance has already said that we are not buying any more Russian oil because they're very worried about it may affect their larger business if they challenge the United States.
Mm.
So I'm afraid what you said should be our longer term strategy, but I think it can't be realized that easily.
Mm. It's going to be a tough. It's going to be a tough game. There's no question about it. One can kind of see that happening, sir. When we look at, I wanted to come to Iran, sir. Uh, you know, when you compare the interests of Russia, China, and India in Iran, let me just take China first, and then you can just answer, and that'll be pretty much our last question. Uh, China lost about 100 billion, lost or is in, tizzy in Venezuela. At the moment, it's comsi comsa, it's iffy. A lot of people say that $400 billion deal in Iran is also kind of tizzy right now. So there's this loss which is, of course, being realized by all of us. Russia lost quite a bit in Syria. Uh, we are losing Chabahar. There's that, American power which is probably, I don't know, reasserting itself or whatever it is. Somewhere down the line, these three countries will put a stand down. Do you think that is going to happen, or they're just going to say, okay, fine, we don't want a confrontation right now. This guy is there probably for the next some time. We'll deal with the next guy, and probably in the next 3-4 months when his or 6 months when his midterms happen, he's going to calm down, and then we'll figure out what needs to be done. So let's take some losses, and we'll reassert ourselves going forward. Is that what you see all the three of them doing? Because yeah, the big statements, we're not going to this, that, not acceptable, we are concerned, and this, that. But the ground actions completely say that no point, just back away.
Couple of things. I was very struck by the fact that, when the 12-day conflict occurred between
Yeah.
Iran and Israel, and Putin said publicly, and I heard him, that we were willing to give defense assistance to Iran, but Iran
Said no.
was reluctant. So the one thing that both Russia and China can do is to build up Iran.
Mhm.
Uh, but the problem here is militarily. The problem here is that Russia has also deep interests in Saudi Arabia. One of the countries that Putin visited was Saudi Arabia, and
And this, that, yeah.
within OPEC and everything else, they need to coordinate.
Yeah.
And Russia has had strong interest in the Middle East. They don't want, although they've suffered a serious setback in Syria,
Yeah.
they don't want to be knocked out
Mhm.
of the Middle East. If you remember, when Assad was in power, Russia was actually not allowing Iran to operate freely in Syria against Israel.
Yeah.
So Russia is very concerned about the about terrorism and Islamic ideology and all that flowing from this region into the Caucasus and into Russia. So
Mhm.
they want to be there. They want to play a balancing game.
sort of role. Yeah.
So Russia, after Azerbaijan was part of the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan and Israel have difficult relations. So uh, Armenia is very unhappy with Russia that they think that they favored Azerbaijan in this Nagorno-Karabakh thing. What I'm pointing out is that Russia has to balance.
Hmm.
Uh, it can't go all out to fully support Iran. So, but at the same time, they can give them, if Iran is so inclined, sufficient defensive material so
Yeah.
that it becomes costly for America and for Israel to take military action. So far as oil is concerned, Russia has no particular interest in Iranian oil, but China does. China is taking 30% of Iranian oil. Uh, so that is, but it'll continue. It'll continue to do so
Mm.
because I don't think United States will be able to physically stop that. Now, with regard to uh, Chinese investments in Iran or the future of those investments, Iran, I think China will continue to do so because part of their entire domination, effort to dominate the entire Central Asian region, and in which I include Iran. If you look at geography
Mm.
and the neighborhood of Iran, is part of the same region, and therefore they would like to maintain their hold over the region and over uh, Iran.
Larger
So,
part.
uh,
Yeah.
so therefore, I don't think that United States will be able to dislodge Chinese interests in
Mm.
Iran. Venezuela was easier game, right
Mm.
next door, far away from China, so China could absorb that blow.
Mm.
Uh, but but then most of the Latin American countries, uh, in terms of their biggest trading partner in the world, that is China. So China has very extensive interests and investments in Latin America, which will not be affected by what's happened in Venezuela. So the picture is not that easy in terms of America knocking out seriously China from the areas in which they have deep economic and commercial interests.
Mm. But do you think these countries will kind of take a step back at the moment? Yeah, this guy is nuts. Let's just back off. We'll keep our game alive. We'll show, okay, fine, whatever it is, and then we'll reassert ourselves when this guy is on a little weaker
If you
wicket
look
going.
at the statements, Russia has made strong statements, and also it appears that they have cautioned Israel. They offered
Yeah.
mediation, cautioned Israel not to do anything. And China made a very strong statement on what the threat that Trump was declaring, the threat that uh, he sets against Iran, where he said we are locked and loaded, and this and that, and saying that the demonstrators should take over the institutions. In other words, regime change. But China made a strong statement. And in fact, I don't know if the statement I read was authentic or not. Uh, even talking about military support to Iran. I don't know if you saw that because these days you never know,
Yeah.
what you see on X whether it is fake news or correct news. But uh, China has the capacity to make U.S. Uh, how should I say, pressures on Iran or US military action against Iran more costly than it might be otherwise.
Yeah.
Uh, so, but China again, I don't think will come to the rescue of Iran if tomorrow, let's say, there was a physical attack by the United States. I don't think China will intervene.
Mm. Well, that's the whole thing. No? So, I mean, if they don't intervene, then oh, see, I'm beating back. The whole propaganda of it is just too much. And so it's better to just stay away from it rather than
Yeah,
get
but
your.
the thing is that you saw what happened in Iraq. When
Yeah.
in Iraq, it was possible to replace one set of rulers by another set of rulers because earlier the Sunnis were ruling minority, they were ruling Iraq, and then they got knocked out. The Baath party uh, was wiped out or was demobilized, etc., etc., and the Shias took over. But in Iran, it's not like that.
No, no.
So, so they can't really dislodge the Iranian regime uh, that easily. Uh,
Mm.
so, and more unrest, more civil war in Iran can be extremely costly to the region. But if Iran's back was put against the wall, theoretically, they could attack the energy infrastructure of Saudi Arabia and UAE, and also make the Hormuz state, block the Hormuz straits and make
Yeah.
them uh, unnavigable. And look what happens then. Everything goes out of control. So it's extremely risky, but Trump has backed off. Actually, he's backed off. I mean, he's claiming credit because of my threats. They have stopped executing people.
Yesterday, Iran said, no, we're not. The executions continue. I was like, okay, this is interesting. They're crazy, sir. The CNN is now starting to say, oh, they fired chemical weapons on their own people. Oh, they launched chemical weapons on us when they fired on our people in 2000. Those people have started getting cancer. So, that whole nonsense is started uh, probably building another narrative for something or the other in the future. But
So basically,
it's going.
my own view is that yes, the mullah regime or the clerics regime has many unsavory aspects. There's no doubt about it. And because of these long years of sanctions imposed on them, economically they have been squeezed. They've tried to find ways and means of getting around it, but it has distorted the economic functioning of Iran, inside and outside, which has then given to power to those elements which could work within this extremely unstable system. And it required a bit of mafia culture, where
Mm,
certain groups could keep the whole economy alive through sanction busting and this and that, and all that comes with a certain degree of economic criminality, if you like. Uh, and then, because of the experience of Iran, they have more than one uh, element in their defense structures. There are Pasardan, there is the IRGC, there is the regular army, and this and that, to make sure that the country cannot be sabotaged from within.
mm,
Uh, there are those people who are deeply, deeply committed to
mm,
the regime, right or wrong reason. Therefore, my view is, if there has to be a change of regime, let this come from the Iranian people. Let it come from the Iranian people. I mean, why do other Western countries or others want a regime change and interfere and give moral lectures and this and that? And they are in no position to give any moral lectures. And to then say that because the economic situation in Iran has provoked the rioting and government is acting against that, seems to suggest that this is something which has happened suddenly. But behind this, there is decades of sanctions,
mhm.
decades of sanctions. And there's a Brookings report of 2005 or 2009, I forget the exact
9, 9.
nine, which
Bruce Red.
actually outlines completely the scenario which we are seeing today. It's part
Absolutely.
of a very well thought of regime change program, as in the case of Ukraine, where the
Yeah.
RAND report actually laid out what US should do. Anyway, this is what it is.
Interesting. Thank you so much, sir. Always a pleasure talking to you. Times are tough, and I'm sure we'll be able to kind of figure out what needs to be done. But thank you so much for your time. And to the audience, my request is share your comments, share your thoughts, and let us know what you guys think is going to happen in the future. Namaskar.
Bye. Thank you.